It's a great time in the business. We're at this big inflection point. It's growing like crazy. Propulsion's kind of interesting in that, you normally have a box that you deliver to a customer with some documentation and then you never hear from them again. But with chemical propulsion, you supply the hardware and then someone needs to process the fuel. Someone needs to support the filling of that at the launch site. We're beginning to get into that kind of logistics side of the world. And there is a lot of opportunity with the just sheer volume of spacecraft that are going to be launched in the next five years. That kind of logistics side is huge. So yeah, we've got opportunities there.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with my friend Chris Pearson, CEO at Agile Space Industries, a propulsion solutions provider. Chris, thanks for chatting with me today.
Yeah, good to see you again, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see you. This is exciting. The network of the space companies is really starting to come together, and you're definitely a pinnacle in that, often out on the road speaking. But before we get into Agile Space Industries, just tell listeners, how did you get? You came to America, you did some cool things. Just give us a little bit of that journey. I think it's unique, but also inspiring.
No, I appreciate that. It's a long story, so I'll try and be selective. Yeah, I'm originally from the UK. I've been a space guy my entire career, so that's almost 3 decades now. And yeah, I fell in love with the US a long time ago. I kind of came over here and traveled and worked around on the East Coast and then spent a summer out actually in Flagstaff working and bought an old, battered out old Jetta and put about 7,000 miles on that in 3 weeks and just fell in love with the Southwest and knew this is where I wanted to get to. Path to immigration is interesting, right? It takes a while. You have to find the way. Probably should have married American. Don't tell my wife. But yeah, the space industry as well, even more than it is today, was so much sort of centered here in the US. This is where all the exciting stuff was going on. Really, really cool projects and opportunities. And this is where I wanted to be. So kind of lucky in my first job was actually a US UK kind of military satellite communications program. So I spent a lot of time over here in the US. We were training operators how to run their spacecraft and responding to anomalies, which was the coolest part of the job when you're a young engineer. You're at the real edge where things are going wrong. You have to deal with them quickly with tons of pressure. Great job. But yeah, the US operations were all actually here in Colorado Springs. So it was down at Schriever Air Force Base a lot. And that pull to America was just getting stronger and stronger, And around about, was it 2004, I got the opportunity to basically set up a sales office for a UK component supplier. So this was lithium-ion batteries when they were very, very novel. Before even Tesla was around, actually, the battery architecture that they use was actually what we presented for space. So we were Tesla before Tesla for space.
There you go.
And been really successful in Europe, and we're starting to make inroads here. And my boss was like, "Well, move out there and set up a sales office." So myself and my wife Sue, we moved out. We gave it 5 years. The sales office was in my basement. And after about 2 years, the company got bought by a private equity firm who really wanted to grow the US side of the business. And my boss was then, "Do you want to replicate a UK facility there in Northern Colorado?" So within the space of 2 years, I wasn't an engineer anymore. I'd moved to the US and now suddenly I was an entrepreneur trying to grow a new company in a foreign country. And it was hugely under pressure. Trying to get cash positive during the Great Recession was extremely challenging. This was about sort of 2007, 2008. But pulled together a team and we built a business. It was a great ride and I loved it. The getting the business going and the financial side of it was obviously great, but just getting a team together and getting them to work and seeing what you could do and make things bigger than it ever was when you're on your own as you grow was just great. So we took that company to about 50, 60 people, did all sorts of cool projects, the James Webb Space Telescope. I'm sure you've heard of that. The batteries for that were built here in Longmont. They're still in orbit now, still obviously powering that spacecraft. The first contract we had was actually retrofitting the spacesuit batteries. So when the guys do their EVAs outside of the space station and they have the big backpack on there for their life support and cooling system actually as well. All that is powered by batteries that we built in Longmont. So really, really cool stuff. I left the company, as I say, 2011. We sold the company to a big public battery firm, and that company's gone bigger than it was when I was there. There were 120 people doing really cool things. So after that, there was no way back being an engineer. It was all about being an entrepreneur. I loved it. Did a couple of high level kind of corporate development roles for some big primes, and then got the chance to kind of do another startup. So this one was a company called Rocore that was in Longmont. A little bit different. The technology was similar. It was a component, if you like, that goes into spacecraft. This time, think big antennas that unfurl. So we call them deployable systems, where you have to fold things up on the launch vehicle because there's a small amount of payload space in there. But if you're going to get true aperture, which obviously you need for big antennas and for solar arrays, those kind of things, that was our speciality. But the firm was completely employee owned, which was awesome. So I came in as employee number 12. We'd not taken any outside capital at all. We built the company on SBIRs. It's probably doing about 2 million in revenue when I joined, something like that, 2.5. And my job was then turning all that technology and emerging products into real commercial sales. So going out, building relationships with the big primes, winning contracts, and then getting the company ready to actually execute on those and deliver flight hardware. It's very different to like a prototype shop, you know. Again, it was great. We took that company from about 12 people all the way up to 80. Those revenues went from about 2 million to about 20 when we sold, I think it was. And that was in 2020. And another story during COVID. But yeah, we sold that company to Redwire, who is a private equity roll-up. We were, I think, their third or fourth acquisition. Stayed with them for a couple of years, managed a couple of divisions, one out in Boston and one out in Luxembourg, before I decided to get back on the crazy train again with Agile and grow another kind of high growth, high pressure start for space. And I love it. It gets me out of bed in the morning. There's never a day where I get up and I know what I'm going to be doing the next day. You know, today started at 5 o'clock. I got my 2 hours in before the emails began to come in and the phone rings. By 10 o'clock, my day's completely upside down, and I'm dealing whatever is the kind of hot button issue. I love it. I'm very, very lucky at being in an industry and kind of doing a job where I just get to do some cool stuff with some really smart folks.
That is awesome. And you did complete, became a U.S. citizen then in this process, in this trip?
I did, yeah. So it was 7 years to get a green card, and setting up a US-based component supplier as a non-US person. I'm sure you're familiar with export control. That's a challenge, and I think it's testament to kind of how stubborn and tenacious I am that we managed to pull it off, and also kind of how good the product was. It was really wanted by the community. But yeah, the day I got my green card was probably the biggest change. I suddenly was on the right side of export control. Folks could talk to me without licenses and all the rest of it. Naturalized in 2016, the US citizen now for some time, almost a decade. I've got 2 girls, both born in Colorado. You'd have no idea they had British parents. My wife's from the same town as me in the UK. Eldest is about to go to CU, so she's a buff as well. Yeah, fully Americanized these days, Dave.
So they don't have an accent, huh?
You know, I've got 2. My eldest is 17, definitely not with her, but my youngest, who's 11, she does the best British accent. It's like Dick Van Dyke, you know, in Mary Poppins. It's terrible. I love it when she puts it on. It's great.
That's great. That's fantastic. Well, I want to go back to that a little bit, but tell me then about Agile Space, what your mission is, where, kind of how you walked into that, and then where, maybe a little bit of trajectory as well.
Yeah, so I'm kind of really fortunate with my career. I've been a operator of missions. I've worked as a prime manufacturer. I've worked as a supplier. So I've got to touch a lot of parts of the kind of market and understand how, procurement works with each of the different parts, military space and commercial space, and then obviously NASA. And you have a good feel for where there's sort of gaps in technology, where the choke points are in the industry. And as I was coming to my end at Redwire and trying to work out what I want to do next, I was aware of Agile. We started to talk, and I was intrigued by the stage of the business. Is the first thing. It's got to be at the right stage for you to add value. I'm not a founder and kind of big inventor, but in terms of commercialization and scaling, that's where my strength is, right? So it's kind of finding a business at the right stage, and it checked that box. But chemical propulsion is one of those parts of the space industry where there's actually not been that much innovation and investment over the last probably 20 years, actually. So what it's used for is we don't do the propulsion to get you to space. So the big rockets you see kind of taking off from the pads, those big first stages, that's not us. But the in space propulsion is where we shine. So that's getting things to the right destinations and kind of changing orbits. And the investment that had gone in on that side had been very much geared towards tech called electric propulsion, which is basically what's used on Starlink by SpaceX. It's what's going to be used on Kuiper, which is the rival that Amazon are building. And that's a great technology if you are deploying a big mega constellation, because one of the drivers for that is deploying as many spacecraft as quickly as you can. So it's all about trying to stack as many as you can. As you deploy that constellation, you've actually got quite a bit of time to kind of deploy it and spread those spacecraft out. And electric propulsion kind of shines there. It's slow, but it's highly, highly efficient, right? The problem is, and this is where chemical kind of comes in, there's a whole swath of applications for space where that just doesn't work. So you think about if you're a military asset in space and for national security, just the multiplier that our space assets are here in terms of what we can achieve with our assets terrestrially, they're multiplied by the SATCOM we get, by the GPS navigation, the ISR kind of capabilities. Our adversaries know that. And they treat it as a potential kind of Achilles heel for us. So the last 3 or 4 years, maybe even 5 years, you've seen a change in a lot of the language from DoD and Space Force, where we're now getting ready to actually fight a potential war in space. That was not talked about like 5 years ago. And to be able to be ready to do that, you have to have technologies which just weren't available before. And that degree of maneuverability is key to that. You think about trying to respond to some aggression. So you've spotted someone doing something weird in one part of space, you need to get there quickly and either observe or even engage. If there's a threat like anti-satellite weapons, which have been tested very, very recently by some of our peer competitors, it's all about speed to get out of the way. All of those things are what you need chemical propulsion for. So I could see that there was a need coming, and Agile was in this place where its whole kind of differentiator was about speed, not just speed on orbit, but speed of getting the hardware into the hands of these spacecraft suppliers. So we've embraced things like additive manufacturing. We do a lot of high temperature exotic metal AM that's required for these engines. But instead of having a big complex engine with lots and lots of parts that you need to source and then assemble together, we print all that complexity into small sub-assemblies. So what that basically means is we can test on a Monday, discover an issue with an engine, tweak the design, we can run our additive manufacturing machines and be back on the test stand on like a Friday. That cycle, it is months to years for some of the traditional primes. So we're able to get the hardware in the hands of folks quickly. And going back to, the investment, there's no one else was doing that. About 3 or 4 years ago, Agile had kind of spotted this kind of gap, and the opportunity was there to really scale Agile and start to eat into that market. And that's what we've done. It's been an incredible sort of growth path. We only really started to build hardware about 2020. So our revenues that year about 150K. It was a ragtag group of folks in a garage operation. The last 3 years, the revenues have gone up by almost 50% each year. So we hit about 17 million last year. And this year, without winning any more business, which we will do, but without winning any more business, we're looking at a growth rate again of another 50%. So yeah, we're in a great position in the industry. There's a big need, not just actually from national security, but also from commercial space and NASA. But yeah, really, that's where the opportunity is for Agile. It's fueling a huge amount of growth for us.
That's great. I'd like to come back to tech in a bit, but from a business perspective, you mentioned you've done some SBIRs and done kind of that innovation, previous company mentioned that, maybe with this one as well. Talk to me about how that journey's been, and getting it into, if you've gotten anything into a program of record or where that's fueled your ability to get contracts. that are sustainable, not just a one prototype, as you mentioned. And then talk to me about how, as I always think this is fascinating, just as different space companies or companies period come across, the transition then in Agile and how you have funded your growth and what,
Yeah.
because that's a pretty significant revenue increase. That doesn't come without investment. So how did that work, across your journey?
Yeah. So let me kind of compare and contrast, because you mentioned the SBIR stuff in there. And look, I think good thing to say is the SBIR program has always been huge to kind of helping new companies get off the ground, get new technology developed that can then get incorporated into programs of record. It doesn't always come from the SBIR firm. They often get acquired. Some of that IP will be relicensed, but it's been a great program. What has changed a lot, and this will get into how Agile has been successful. What's changed a lot is that used to be a very top-down kind of program. So what I mean by that is you'd have they call them principal investigators or PIs in each of the agencies that basically were looking at the future needs and then saying, okay, this little technology niche is like something I want to invest in, and they put an RFP out for that specific one, and then you go and you win a small grant and develop that tech. And a lot of that tech never really went anywhere. It didn't really go into products because maybe the market had shifted. What you're seeing now is a smaller number of bigger awards. They're more targeted. There's more flexibility in there. So it's allowing folks to look at more of a solution than just a technology. Other changes, again, it used to be very top down. Now it's very collaborative. So the DoD, the Space Force, the other agencies, they are much more open to having conversations well before these funding solicitations have kind of come out. So you can have those conversations, understand where you can actually add value and get ahead of it before that proposal comes. And that's important because the best way to leverage this is to put your own skin in the game as well. So not just have SBIR funds, but then put some of your own IRAD investment towards it. But you can only do that, especially as a small business, when you've got confidence it's going to come. And then I'll call it the kind of last part of the triangle, when you really hit the jackpot, is when you've got good, strong commercial relationships with your future customers that allow you to get some CRAD in there as well. And that's beautiful because that usually gives a real flight path. So one of the traditional barriers is chicken and egg. If you don't get a flight without a contract, we don't get a contract without flight heritage. But having a prime involved who's got a real need for this and prepared to make the investment, that breaks that chicken and egg. And the best part of that triangle for me is everybody looks great when it's successful. The government has got a multiplicative return of investment on theirs. The prime is solving a problem that they couldn't have done on their own. And then obviously for the small business, it's just a commercial accelerator. So we've been successful with that, and we were starting to be able to do some of that at Rocore, the last company. We had our first flight through just that kind of trifecta. As we've moved towards Agile now, and it's even more collaborative, that's the approach we're taking. So, you asked about investment. We make IRAD investments into most of our projects. We don't expect the government or the prime to kind of foot the bill for the entire NRE. And then in return, we're sharing in the IP. So it helps us to kind of broaden that commercialization after we get flight heritage. The way you do that is a lot of pounding the pavement, and it's a lot of relationships, right? You really got to have a good, strong kind of Rolodex. So, one reason I think we've been successful is the fact that myself, my head of business development, was the founder at Rocore. He's been in the space industry for 20, 25 years. We've got these relationships with folks that are now in different organizations that we can pull on. So yeah, Agile's taken that approach. And then the way we've been able to do that is in the early days, it's an interesting company. The other firms I've been at, you have a nice technology, you turn that into a product, and then you commercialize it. And qualification can usually be a bit of an afterthought, and that involves a lot of testing. So the test infrastructure that you need to get in place can actually be a bit of a pain and slow things down. Agile began the other way around. So we were doing test services for about 10 years. We built up a test capability down in Durango. And if you've ever seen a rocket engine being tested, our engines are maybe about this big. But the facility we use is like a 3-story building. There is all sorts of regulatory compliance we have to have. It's hazardous materials. There's training. There's a complex data acquisition system which is in there. There's all these different things that are barriers to entry for the people that were traveling into it. And those 10 years allowed us to perfect test and build up the infrastructure. So we kind of broadened into product in maybe 2021. We acquired an additive manufacturing firm up in Pennsylvania that gave us the elements to kind of turn the handle. So yeah, a lot of the infrastructure investments, they came from contracts. So Missile Defense Agency was like an early tester. They had a program where they just needed that testing done quickly, and all those profits were reinvested in the business. We had some early angel investors way before my time that kind of came in. They saw the potential. I think at that stage it's as much the management team as it is the business plan. But they saw that there was good potential there. And then probably about 5 years ago is when maybe some of the funds, the VCs began to come in as we began to look to product. So it's been a mixture. We've taken non-dilutive funding, especially from SBIR, but also from some state incentives here. There's been a lot from contracts, be it from primes or from the government. And then, the last few years, as we've really grown, we've had some strategic investors as well. So Lockheed Martin Ventures is now on the cap table. And that's great. When you've got a customer that's invested in you, then that's awesome. So yeah, we've tried to take a little bit of everything, and there's pluses and minuses to that. And when we did the employee bootstrap firm with Rocore, I don't think I'll ever work in an environment again where you could move that quickly. There were 3 of us in the decision chain, and we all lived in the same town. We could just call each other up and just do it. I've now got a board that I report to. I've got investors spread across the US. So I spend a lot more time managing this way. But if you have a more capital intensive business that you're trying to build, you have to accept that, right? And we've been lucky. It's not just capital. The investors we have bring a lot more than that, right? Be it insight into the industry, DODIC connections, but also just experience kind of building things at scale that I haven't had, right? This is a bigger P&L than I've ever had before, so it's more complex.
Yeah, that's great. And have you seen, if you look back at kind of the VC trends, if you will, there wasn't, years ago, much interest in hardware, space hardware. It seems like that's started to change. Talk to me about kind of that, how the capital is starting to free up, if it is, in your perspective, towards the hardware. It's very much not SaaS like it used to be. It's, it's hardware's there. And then, do you guys have any investment stuff coming up? Like, are you still trying to grow through, really accelerate your growth through, additional capital?
Yeah. So I think, in terms of where we are, so we've come into 2025 with about $42 million of backlog, right? So that's where that, without winning any more work, we can have another 50% increase in growth. We have won more work. So since the beginning of the year, we actually closed another 25 million in bookings, which is more than, it's probably about 2/3 of what we booked in the entirety of last year. So we're in a situation where we're pretty cash neutral. The last 6 months, we billed roughly probably just over $2 million a month, and the outgoings are maybe that minus about 100K. So we're broadly cash neutral. So why are we fundraising now? It's because space takes time, especially on the hardware side. As we're trying to get that capacity up to meet those programs which are coming in, it takes time to find and hire talent. It takes time to build out a new facility. We're actually expanding in Durango now. You mentioned, Oklahoma. We have another test site which is coming online there. All of those things have lead times in the months, even years in some of those. So this raise at the moment is pure growth capital. This is about getting ahead of those programs, making sure that we are shovel ready and that we execute for the customers. Because going back to the intimacy of the industry and everybody knowing each other, it takes a long time to kind of build up a reputation, right? And kind of credibility. And if we continue to execute, then more business is going to come. But the converse happens as well, right? If you don't execute.
Yeah, absolutely. How big a fundraise you guys are going to do?
It's a roughly $10 million raise. Yeah. So it's not a huge one. And we're in a good position. The capital needs we had are actually reduced. So we started the Series A activity actually beginning of last year, and then we had an opportunity through AttackFi. If you're familiar with that, is a DoD matching funding kind of process. DoD wanted to accelerate one of our programs and make an award, and that was the fastest mechanism. But we had to raise some money quickly to be able to do it. So yeah, we had a small raise last year, which was about 4 million. That's just meant we've actually needed less this year. So that's in the current environment. You asked that question. That's very rare when you can go back to a bunch of investors and say, "Oh, actually, we need less capital now." I'd actually guess their interest. I think in terms of how the environment's changed, it's kind of hard for me to judge. I've come from like a bootstrapped environment, so I've only really got the last couple of years to kind of really compare. It's definitely opening up compared to where it was. Some of that is a general market, but I think on the other side of it, it's just the progression of the business that's kind of made things easier too. Yeah, we could place to start.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, well, best of luck with that. That's obviously super exciting. And to be in a position where you're driving the terms and you're not under the hammer of desperation is also a fantastic way to raise capital.
Yeah, so that time to raise money is not when you need it, right?
No, it's definitely not. Well, let's go a little bit more to the tech then. So you're talking about, the chemical propulsion. What else? So you got battery propulsion. My impression, and I'm not super savvy in the space, but it is all different. Is it a certain chemical that you're using? Is that kind of your market differentiator that you're able to harness, a specific chemical that makes yours better? Or is it the ability that you've combined it with a rocket so you're very quick, like you mentioned, and being able to meet customer demands, changing, innovate? Like, where is your secret sauce?
Yeah, I'll just take a step back first. So there's kind of two, as you compare different kind of propulsion technologies, there's kind of two axes. So one of them it's a parameter called ISP, but just basically think of that as efficiency. So to make the same maneuver, the amount of fuel you need. And you can imagine on a spacecraft having to carry a lot of fuel that drives a lot of things, cost, launch cost, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing. But then the other axis is basically acceleration. So in a dream world, you want both. You want to be able to accelerate fast, change orbit and speed fast, but be very efficient. The only way to do that is nuclear propulsion. That has been 20 years away ever since I've been in the industry. There are folks that are trying to do that. I think it's as hard technically as it is from a regulatory point of view. Having nuclear sources on spacecraft, on rockets that could fail and spread debris is always an issue. So there are hurdles with that, both bringing the tech to market, but also just developing the tech. So you're left with what's called electric propulsion. So basically doing there is you start with typically an inert gas and you turn that into a bunch of charged ions, and then you accelerate those ions with an electric field. And it's the acceleration of those ions which pushes on the spacecraft and basically gives you your change in acceleration. Very, very efficient, but very, very slow. What we do is you basically think about it as a kind of controlled explosion. So we have fuels that we dissociate, and as they dissociate, they do explode. you do that in a combustion chamber. That's why it's called a combustion chamber, and you channel that force through a nozzle, and it's that force which actually pushes your spacecraft along. So you can imagine there the way I explain it. That's why the accelerations are higher, because there's just more force which is there. One way we do it is with a fuel called hydrazine. And you run that over a catalyst so that even without oxygen in space, the reaction happens, right? The other way we do it is with bipropellants. So what we have there is we have both a fuel and an oxidizer. And there you really are having the fuel and the oxidizer kind of coming together. And it's called a hypergol, which means when they come together, they ignite just by themselves. And you get an even more energetic reaction there. So for the applications that really require the big, fast kind of accelerations. So think like landing on the moon. The amount of force you need to kind of decelerate as you're touching down, that's a bipropellant kind of reaction or application. So yeah, in terms of what we do that's different, the fuels we use, we actually prefer the stuff that's really tried and proven. So hydrazine has been around since the 50s. all of the infrastructure which is in place at the east and west ranges, so kind of Vandenberg and then the Cape, they're all set up to be able to process this stuff. So we're not really using different fuels. It's more the way that we construct our engines to get the most out of that reaction as possible. So I mentioned the kind of 3D printing. You know, what you're basically doing is you're controlling the flow of these fluids in specific ways that allow you to make the most of these reactions. And the more exotic you can make the shape of those fuel channels, the more exotic you can have very fine channels, then the more you can get out of it. And if you think about the way that you used to create things for like the aerospace industry, you'd start with a big hunk of metal and you basically chip away at it. It's called subtractive manufacturing, basically like CNC machines, those kind of things. It's just impossible to be able to come up with some of the geometric shapes that you can do with 3D printing. So the secret sauce is not so much the fuels, it's actually in getting the most out of 3D printing you can to get a bit of a boost in performance. So yeah, that's really what we do. In terms of the AM is one part of it that allows us to go quick, but I don't want to lose sight of the test facilities. Again, we have something there which is pretty unusual. If you look at the big government test sites like White Sands, that infrastructure was built in the 60s and 70s when the space budgets were much bigger. But going there now, it's not great technology. It takes a long time to actually get on there. So we actually test for the government at times. We test for other primes. So that ability to not just be able to print fast, but just go over the street in Durango and actually do our testing there allows us to go super quick. That's where the innovation is. It's actually in the test facilities in the AM.
That's fantastic. Are there many, facilities like yours, companies that have those test facilities? I mean, is that pretty standard that they would becoming more standard or?
No, so that's the reason for Tulsa. So we have a $20 million incentive from Tulsa. And that's not a tax rebate. That's actual cash to build a facility. And that facility is really to relieve the choke point in the industry. It's the facility there is going to look similar to what we have in Durango, but more tuned for the needs of the entire industry as opposed to just Agile, and that's because we are pretty unique. I'd say some of the incumbents like Aerojet Rocketdyne, who's now part of L3Harris, they have some great facilities, but in terms of recent investment, ability to be able to scale quickly to meet these missions, I don't think there's many people like Agile out there.
Fantastic. Yeah, the primes also just move slower. They may have a good facility, but to do things, it's just harder.
Primes have outsourced a lot of this over the years. So it does not have much of a capability. It's got a great system level kind of capability, can buy propulsion and kind of pull systems together. But in terms of actually testing engines, maybe Northrop Grumman's got a good small site in LA. Raytheon's got a little bit, but again, it's not on the scale of what we have at Agile.
So in your journey with Agile, what's been the biggest hurdle to overcome, maybe just generally and then specifically technology-wise it's been a challenge, but you've been able to overcome it?
Yeah, I mean, pick your day of the week, right? The technology is different, but the challenges are very similar. So I think a lot of it is actually about evolving the business. They're the real challenges at sort of my level that you should be worrying about. And, you go through these phases. I mentioned the garage operation, the kind of prototype shop. You move from that to kind of your first flight hardware, and it becomes a lot more controlled, but it's still onesie twosies. And then the next stage is, well, actually, you're not building one or two of these anymore. It's like hundreds, and the first one has to operate the same as the 100th engine that comes off. So repeatability becomes an issue. So you get these phases where innovation is really important. Then it's about control. Engineers not in the clean room actually touching the hardware anymore. It's technicians. It's more formality and procedures. It's getting ISO accredited. All of those things. Some people embrace that, and some people are just more comfortable at different stages of the business. So getting the organization to kind of evolve without losing all the good things you've had at each of those stages is really challenging, right? It's if you can do that, so you retain both the innovation piece, but you also have the kind of volume production piece. That's the real trick for me. And yeah, coming into Agile was new for me, in that other startups I've been I've been there from day one or very close to day one. With Agile, it's different. You're coming in and the business is already 60 people. It's been operating for maybe 12 years, I think it was, when I came in. And so you've quickly got to get some of these things happening, which need to be done, but you don't have the ability to be able to calibrate everything you're seeing. So yeah, building the airplane as you're flying it, but also not even having a manual and like knowing who the crew was. Yeah, that was probably the biggest challenge there. But yeah, we've got a fantastic team now. My chief operating officer has just got the broadest set of shoulders I've ever seen. He's a West Point grad. He's built infrastructure under fire in Afghanistan. So a day in the office in Durango is nothing compared to that, right? And then my CFO and my head of business development were both with me at the last kind of business. So once you've got those elements in place, it becomes a lot easier. But yeah, that's been the biggest challenge, like the business level, and then kind of technology. Really, again, it's similar to what you've seen before. The innovation you're bringing is innovative because it hasn't been done before. And as you're trying to deliver on these first contracts, you continually learn it. And it's making sure that your team doesn't shirk from the challenge, doesn't kind of like try and wash over everything. You really burn down risk. It's interesting. Another kind of thing we could talk about is when you have a new tech like that, you never eliminate risk. You never know 100% if this thing is going to work when it gets on orbit. And that's if you're a component supplier that's been doing the same thing for 20 years. You never know 100%. There's always a chance for a surprise. But when it's the first one and your business depends on its success, the stakes are even higher. There is no manual. There's no DoD standard for kind of qualifying that tech. It's the best you can do. If you're not careful, you can get stuck in analysis paralysis and you never do anything and you never deliver. So getting people to put the pens down and move forward and get an appropriate level of risk, be open with the customer, which is, that's a challenge for some folks that have come from a different environment, especially in big companies where they don't even talk to the customer. And now suddenly they have to, it's that side of things and making sure that balance is right, that again, you're optimizing risk without putting too much risk on the company by not moving forward. They're the big challenges.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. I think you're spot on of the culture challenge. It's just the way it changes. There are different stages of companies and often requires different things. So kudos to you for being able to manage through that too, because that's not a natural thing. Like you said, you haven't seen all the companies at these different stages. So that shows.
I mean, what you got to do is any leader that's good is you're strong in some things, right? And you've got to be humble enough and honest enough with yourself and the folks around you as to where you need the help. That's the first stage. And then the second stage is bringing that team together that can offer those gaps, right? And cover the blind spots. That's when good stuff really happens,
Absolutely. Well, where do you think, as you look out there, obviously you're trying to finish off a round or get a good Series A cooked off. What are your plans for the next, and you talked a little bit maybe more specifics, next 5 years, next couple of years, up to 5 years, and any exciting projects or partnerships that you see in the future?
Yeah, so it's a great time in the business. We're at this big inflection point. It's growing like crazy. Propulsion's kind of interesting in that you normally have a box that you deliver to a customer with some documentation, and then you never hear from them again. But with chemical propulsion, you supply the hardware, and then someone needs to process the fuel. Someone needs to support the filling of that at the launch site. We're beginning to get into that kind of logistics side of the world, and there is a lot of opportunity with the just sheer volume of spacecraft that are going to be launched in the next five years. That kind of logistics side is huge. So yeah, we've got opportunities there. Don't want to go into too much detail there, but you can ask me again in another 6 to 12 months. The product side is really interesting, where we began with engines. The next biggest choke point in the propulsion industry is actually propellant tanks. So we've got our first contract for tanks. Once you have the tanks and you have the engines, the natural next step is just to deliver the whole propulsion system. So a customer there delivers us the kind of core structure, and we integrate and then deliver back so they can finish it. Very close to win our first contract there. So the hardware side of the business has just got great momentum. I think the AM side of the business is interesting. When we bought that company five or so years ago, we didn't really have any sales team. Well, we haven't had any sales team. We assumed it was going to be a cost center. But that part of the business still does a lot of work for the outside world. There are other aerospace and defense, especially applications that really benefit from those fine features I was describing. So things like heat exchangers, hypersonics, things that have EW kind of applications. There's a big pull there. So scaling that side of the business, definitely some potential there too. But yeah, we're on a path with those revenue streams. We're looking at a growth up to about 120 million in revenue within 5 years. We'll definitely need the Oklahoma site, but we also need to scale our production, and that will probably be in Oklahoma. Probably not going to be in Durango. Could be Colorado, but deciding the best location for that site and then scaling the business. We'll probably be somewhere between 200 to 250 people by that point. It's a cool time. We've got a path. It's obvious we're on it. It's making sure we execute now. This is the fun part, Dave, right? The last couple of years has been a lot more messy. This is the fun part.
Are you, is there an intent to drive for an acquisition, or are you more you're just going to do your best and just let the chips fall where they do?
Yeah, one of the reasons I joined the company is the other two exits I had were to kind of PE based folks, very fixed kind of time horizon for exit, and that can be a little bit tough on a business when you're growing fast, being able to not be constrained and lose the ability to create even more value. One of the reasons that I joined Agile is the board there was very much blank sheet of paper, VC mentality, where as long as you're still creating value, and quite clearly, the pace is accelerating, you just keep going. So the easy button, if you like, is, the chemical propulsion kind of sector is very strategic for a lot of big missions, especially on the classified side. There is an interest from primes to make sure that they're diversified and not relying on the incumbents, basically. So there is an opportunity there for strategic acquisition, but quite frankly, the next 6 to 12 months for me is really exciting post-A. Well, where can we go next? And there's a lot of ideas within propulsion, beyond propulsion, even beyond space, that we can grow the company. So, yeah. Ask me again in 12 months, I'll tell you.
We'll have you back on. That's exciting. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up, but, Chris has been fantastic. Just your perspective on business, the way you've scaled this company, the skill set, that's, fantastic. And I love where you guys are going from a mission, and just how you're, accomplishing multiple, vertically integrated solutions to go get shit done. So kudos to you. If folks want to, are they interested in your investing opportunities or want to get a hold of you, how best would they do that?
Yeah, probably a good place to start is just connect me on LinkedIn. Then we can go from there, Dave. That's the quick way.
Perfect. Well, that's great. Well, thank you, sir. Look forward to seeing you around the block.
No, I'm sure we will. All right, you take care. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, perfect.